Welcome to an amazing story, science fiction lovers. In this episode, I'll be telling you the story of John and the alien Princess Ariana. Buckle up, and let's enjoy the story together. The alien princess was about to choose a husband when her mother whispered in her ear, "Choose a human man." The choosing hall of the Vandari occupied the top 40 floors of a tower so tall that weather happened somewhere below it, and John, who had been an envoy for exactly 11 days and was already regretting the career change, stood at the far edge of it, trying very hard to look like a man who belonged there. He did not belong there. Everyone in the room knew this in the way a school of fish knows there is one wrong-colored fish among them, and they had arranged themselves accordingly, leaving him a generous circle of empty marble as though poverty of bloodline might be catching. The suitors filled the rest of the hall in a blaze that made John's eyes water. There were nearly 100 of them, each descended from a noble house older than most of the constellations visible through the crystal dome, and each had clearly interpreted, "Wear your best," as become a small sun. They shimmered. They glittered. One lord to John's left wore a cloak woven from something that appeared to be living light, and it kept softly changing color to flatter whoever looked at it, which meant that whenever John glanced over it turned an anxious, apologetic beige. The Vandari themselves were, John had been relieved to discover on arrival, almost embarrassingly similar to humans. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head arranged in the usual configuration, the whole business running on the standard number of hearts. Their skin ran to warm shades of yellow and gold, which under the ceremonial lighting made the assembled nobility look like a very expensive fruit bowl. The only real difference was the ears, long, tapering, elegant things that swept back and up to delicate points, so that every dramatic turn of a Vandari head came with its own little flourish. John had spent his first 3 days on the throne world, fighting the urge to comment on this, and had, he felt, shown tremendous personal growth. A chime moved through the air, not so much a sound as a pressure, and the 100 suitors composed themselves into 100 rehearsed poses. At the head of the hall, the great stair descended from a landing wreathed in slow-drifting motes of gold, and down it came Princess Ariana. John understood, distantly, that she was the most important person he would ever be in a room with, and he tried to feel appropriately reverent. Mostly he felt sorry for her. She had been gilded. That was the only word for it, laid over in ceremonial gold from the crown of her head down her bare arms, so that she moved like a statue that had regretfully agreed to come to life for the afternoon. Her face was arranged into a calm so total, so architecturally perfect, that it went past serenity and out the other side into something that made the hair on John's neck stand up. It was the calm of a person holding a great many things very, very still. Behind her, half a step and 100 years, came the old queen. Where the princess was gold, the queen was iron. She had the face of someone who had signed treaties with her enemies' pens and outlived every one of them, and her eyes went once around the room, cataloging, weighing, dismissing, before settling for the briefest instant on John. He nodded because it seemed rude not to. She did not nod back. This felt correct. Then, as Ariana reached the base of the stair and the whole hall drew a single anticipatory breath, the queen leaned in close to her daughter's long ear and said something no one else could hear. Whatever it was, John saw it land. He was the only one positioned to, everyone else being far too busy admiring themselves. He watched the princess's flawless calm shudder. Just once, just at the corner of her jaw, a hairline crack running through marble, before it sealed over again. Her gaze lifted from the crowd of glittering nobles. It traveled across the whole shining length of the hall, and it stopped on John. He glanced behind himself to see who she was looking at. There was a wall. He looked back. She was still looking at him with the specific, unblinking intensity of a woman doing high-stakes arithmetic, and John's stomach performed a slow, sinking maneuver it usually reserved for turbulence. Ariana stepped forward. The suitors read this as the beginning of the ritual, and rearranged themselves once more into their most winning attitudes. The living light cloak flared hopefully into gold. She walked past it. She walked past the lord who had been introduced to John that morning as the presumptive favorite, a tall, handsome noble named Adrian, whose smile had the polished emptiness of a room prepared for a guest who never arrives, and Adrian's smile faltered as she passed him, then curdled as she kept going. She walked the entire length of that hall, gold on gold, past every rehearsed hope and inherited ambition in the room, and she stopped directly in front of the one man present, who had come only because someone in the protocol office had decided it would look bad not to invite a human at all. "You," Ariana said, in a voice pitched to carry to the crystal dome. "I choose you." The silence that followed had weight. It had texture. It was the kind of silence you could have leaned a ladder against. "I'm sorry," John said, and heard his own voice crack down the middle. He cleared his throat and tried again, quieter, meant only for her. "I think there might be a translation error. I'm the human. I'm decorative. I'm here to fill a chair." "There is no error," she said, equally quiet, and up close he could see that her perfect calm was a performance held together with willpower and possibly nails. Behind it, something was screaming. "Right," John said. "Right. And this is a binding sort of thing, or—" "By the law of 1,000 years," said the old queen from the stair, in a tone of great and terrible satisfaction, "it is done." Somewhere in the crowd, the living light cloak gave up entirely, and went a mournful shade of gray. They gave John a suite the size of a small moon, and a night in which to not sleep in it. The bed alone could have hosted diplomatic negotiations. He lay diagonally across it at 3 in the morning, staring up at a ceiling that displayed, in soft, moving light, the constellations as seen from the Vandari homeworld, and he thought about the fact that he was now, by the law of 1,000 years, married to an alien princess he had exchanged 11 words with. 9 of them had been his. He'd counted. It seemed important to keep track of something. Morning arrived the way everything on the throne world arrived, silently, expensively, and without asking. A servant appeared, bowed at an angle John found architecturally impressive, and informed him that the princess requested his presence in the Eastern Solar. John got dressed in the least glittering thing he owned, which was still, he noted, glittering, and followed the servant through corridors that seemed to reconfigure themselves out of politeness. Ariana was waiting for him in a room walled in glass, with the whole golden sprawl of the capital falling away below. She had been ungilded. That was the first thing he noticed. The ceremonial gold was gone, washed away, and underneath it she was simply a person, warm-skinned and tired-eyed and entirely mortal, dressed in something plain and dark. It made her more alarming, not less. Yesterday she had been a monument. This morning she was a woman with a headache and, apparently, a husband. "Sit," she said. He sat. "Now, tell me why my mother made me marry you." John opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. "I was going to ask you that. I had a whole speech. It was better than this. You don't know. I found out I was engaged approximately 14 hours ago in front of 100 people by being pointed at. I know less than anyone in this building. I know less than the furniture." He spread his hands. "Yesterday I was a courtesy invitation. My entire job was to stand near a wall and prove your people are open-minded. I was doing it beautifully. Ask the wall." Something moved across her face that might, in a better rested woman, have been a smile. It was suppressed with the efficiency of long training. "You are not what I expected an assassin to look like." "An assassin? No. God, no. I get queasy on fast elevators." He leaned forward. "Is that a live theory? Are people saying that?" "People are saying a great many things." She rose and went to the glass, and the city glowed up at her. By dawn, the theory had progressed through. "You are a secret prince of some human house. You have ensorcelled me. You have ensorcelled my mother. You are a test of the court's loyalty, and my personal favorite, that you do not exist at all, and the whole ceremony was a hallucination brought on by bad ceremonial incense." She turned. That last one has surprising support. I like that one. It has dignity. Can we go with that one? No. She sat again, and now the composure cracked in earnest, just for a moment, and beneath it, he saw the thing he'd glimpsed in the hall, something coiled and frightened and furious all at once. I have asked her 3 times. My mother, the queen. 3 times I have asked her why, and 3 times she has answered me with nonsense, weather, a proverb about rivers. This morning she told me that the strongest wall is the one no one thinks worth attacking, and then she asked whether you were eating enough. I'm eating plenty, John offered. The food here is incredible. There was a fruit at breakfast that apologized to me before I bit it. That is a contrition melon. It is considered a great delicacy. She said this with total gravity, and John decided that he liked her, which was an inconvenient thing to decide about a person you'd been sentenced to. The doors opened without a knock, which John was learning meant power. Lord Adrian came through them the way weather comes through a window someone forgot to close. Up close, his handsomeness had a manufactured quality, every feature correct and none of it warm, and his smile arrived a half-second before any reason for it. Behind him drifted 2 other nobles, older, silent, watchful, wearing house colors John didn't recognize but instinctively disliked. Princess. Adrian bowed, exactly deep enough. I came to offer my congratulations. The whole Concord does. Such a bold choice. Historic, really. His eyes moved to John and performed a swift, total appraisal, the way a man reads a receipt he intends to dispute. And this is the fortunate gentleman. You must tell me, envoy, what is it you offer? What house, what fleet, what fortune stands behind you? We are all so curious what the princess saw. Charm, mostly, John said. And I do a passable card trick. Adrian's smile held, but something behind his eyes filed the joke away in a drawer marked later. How refreshing. A man with nothing to lose. He let that sit a beat too long. The Concord has stood beside the throne for 1,000 years, envoy. We take a keen interest in its continuity, in who enters it. I do hope you'll survive the adjustment. Court life can be so hard on the unprepared. He bowed again, to Ariana this time, and withdrew, his silent shadows folding out after him. The doors sealed. The room felt colder by a degree that had nothing to do with temperature. That, John said slowly, was a threat. That was a threat wearing a very nice coat, but it was a threat. Yes, Ariana said, and all the humor had gone out of her. She was looking at the closed doors, as though she could still see the man through them. The Concord is every noble house bound into one. My mother did not simply marry me to a stranger, envoy. She reached into the middle of 1,000 years of ambition and pulled out a pin. She turned to him, and for the first time she looked at him not as a problem, but as the only other person standing on the wrong side of a locked door. And she will not tell me why, only that look she gave me on the stair. I have known my mother my whole life, and I have never once seen her afraid. Yesterday, she was afraid. The archives of the Vandari lived 9 floors underground, in a hush so deep that John's footsteps felt like an accusation. It was Ariana who led him there, 2 days later, after the court's shock had cooled into a watchful, whispering thing that followed them down every corridor. She had a key that did not exist on any list, she said, because her mother had given it to her when she was 9 and told her to lose it, and she never had. Rebellious, John said, approving. 9-year-old contraband. What did you use it for? I read the sealed histories of my house until dawn, for years, until I understood the throne better than the people who wanted to sit on it. She said this without pride, the way a person states the depth of a well. It is the only reason I am still alive to be inconvenienced by you. The archive itself was not shelves, but a vast dark sphere, and inside it drifted records like slow, luminous fish, pale motes that thickened when Ariana beckoned, into columns of light dense with Vandari script. She read them the way other people breathe. John, who could not read a word of it, stood beside her, holding a small, glowing sphere she'd handed him to be useful, and tried to look like scholarship. "Here," she said at last very quietly. The light of the record threw the shadows of her long ears sharp against the far wall. "The choosing law. The real one. Underneath the ceremony." She read, and as she read, her voice went flat with something worse than anger. "When the princess weds, the house she chooses becomes house regnant. Its head sits at the right hand of the throne. Its blood enters the succession. Whichever house won me, won everything. The crown in all but name, within a generation." John did the arithmetic she'd already done. So the 100 suitors weren't 100 suitors. They were one conspiracy wearing 100 faces. The conquered. They agreed, in secret, that whichever of them I chose, the rest would fall in behind, because any of them beat the alternative, which was a throne no house controlled. She turned to him, and the record light made her face very stark. "And then my mother pointed me at the one man in the hall who has no house, no fleet, no faction, no blood worth a single vote. She married me to a nobody, John, on purpose, to wreck it." "I'm going to choose to hear nobody as a term of endearment," John said, "because the alternative is that I've been used as a wrench, and I'd like to keep my self-esteem intact through at least the end of the sentence. You are precisely a wrench." A pause, but an unusually agreeable one. There she is. The romance is blistering. The corner of her mouth betrayed her again, and this time she let it. It was, John thought, an event of some geological rarity, and he chose not to point it out for fear of causing it to go extinct. They rode the archive lift back up in a companionable quiet that had crept in without either of them signing off on it. He'd noticed it happening over the 2 days. The way she'd stopped bracing when he spoke. The way she now argued with him instead of at him. The way the silences had gone from armored to merely restful. It was, he understood dimly, a bad idea. He filed the thought next to all his other bad ideas and lost it there immediately. The lift opened onto the corridor to his suite, and John smelled the wrong thing a full second before his brain named it. Ozone. Hot metal. The scent a machine makes just before it stops being a machine and becomes an event. Ariana. He started, and the light panel above his door detonated. It was not a large explosion. It was a precise one. A shaped charge behind the ceiling fixture, the kind meant to drop a burning slab directly onto whoever stood at the door, working the lock, which is exactly where John, being a creature of habit and low genius, was already reaching. What saved him was not courage or reflex. What saved him was that the emergency fire suppression sphere mounted beside every Vandari door was, in this corridor, mounted at exactly the height of a distracted human elbow. And John's elbow, flailing backward in animal panic, struck it dead center. The sphere did what it was built to do with tremendous enthusiasm. A column of dense inhibitor foam erupted upward, met the falling slab in midair, and turned the whole assassination into a slapstick catastrophe of smoke, foam, and one human being sitting very suddenly on the floor, coated head to foot in something that smelled of mint and looked like the inside of a cloud. Ariana was over him instantly, hands on his shoulders, her calm entirely gone, and her fear entirely visible. Are you? I'm fine, John wheezed, wiping foam out of his eyes. I'm mostly fine. I defeated a bomb with my elbow in a can of instant weather. Put that on my house crest. That's the crest now. You could have died. She was not laughing. She was gripping him hard enough to bruise, and the look on her face was not the look you gave a wrench. But I didn't, because Vandari fire safety is frankly world class. He got a hand up, meaning to reassure her, and it landed on hers, and neither of them moved it. The corridor smoked gently around them. Something had shifted, and they both felt it, and it was terrible timing. And John was about to say so with a joke when Ariana went very still, staring past his shoulder at the wreckage. John. Her voice had changed. The charge. Look at it. He looked. In the twisted, foam-drenched metal of the ceiling fixture, half melted but unmistakable, was a small emblem stamped into the housing. Not Adrian's colors, not the Concord's. Something older. A crest John had seen exactly once. Worn, faded, embroidered on the sleeve of the old queen's own gown. "That's your mother's mark," he said. Ariana stared at it, and all the fear in her face curdled slowly into something far more frightening, the dawning of a question the political plot could not answer. "Yes," she whispered. "It is. And she is the one person in this palace who does not want me dead." They confronted the queen at midnight, because Ariana said that was when her mother stopped being the crown and started briefly being a person, and because John had learned not to argue with Ariana about her mother. They found the old woman alone in a high room open to the night. No guards, no servants, sitting before a window with the cold starlight full on her face, as though she had been expecting them for some hours and had simply decided not to hurry the pain along. Ariana set the melted crest on the table between them without a word. It gleamed dully, foam-stained, accusing. The queen looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "Ah," very softly, and something in the single syllable made John's chest ache without his understanding why. "So, it has begun sooner than I hoped, and cleverer. They used my mark. They wanted you to come to me exactly like this, furious, certain I had lied to you. They wanted you to stop trusting the only ally you have left." She raised her eyes, and they were wet, and John had the disorienting experience of watching iron weep. "It was not me, daughter, but I understand why you would believe it was. I have given you so little reason to believe anything else." "Then give me a reason now," Ariana said, and her voice shook. "No proverbs. No rivers. Why?" The queen was quiet. Outside, the stars wheeled with the terrible patience of things that will outlast every dynasty that ever named them. When she spoke again, it was not to answer the question they had asked, but a much older one. "How many Vandari children have you seen this year, Ariana? In the capital, in the streets? How many?" Ariana opened her mouth, closed it. John watched her run the count and watched the count come back wrong. "You cannot remember," the queen said gently, "because there are almost none. We are dying. Not to war, not to plague, to ourselves. 1,000 years of noble houses hoarding their bloodlines, marrying cousin to keep the blood pure and the power close. 1,000 years of the same narrow blood folding over and over on itself, until it is folded into a knot that cannot bear fruit. Our fertility is a candle in its last hour. The Concord knows. The throne knows. We have hidden the extinction clock behind ceremony and gold for 3 generations, because a frightened people are dangerous, and a hopeless one is worse." She looked at John then, and it was the first time she had truly looked at him. "And then, 40 years ago, your kind arrived. Human. Near identical to us in every way that matters, and utterly unlike us in the one way that saves us. Fresh blood. Deep, unfolded, uncousoned blood. You are not merely compatible with us, envoy. You are, quite literally, the only future we have." The room was very quiet. John became aware that he was standing at the exact center of a species-level catastrophe and holding, for no reason he could reconstruct, a small, glowing sphere he had never given back. "So that's what I am," Ariana said, and her voice had gone flat and awful. "That's what you did. You didn't choose him because of who he is. You chose him because of what he carries. You married your daughter to a genetic resource, a breeding solution wearing a nice coat." She laughed, and it was a terrible sound. And here I was beginning to think, "Ariana," John started. "No." She rounded on him, and the hurt in her face was so raw it was almost unbearable to look at. "You heard her. It was never a you, it was a what. I was never choosing a man. I was choosing a solution." And John, who had spent 3 days learning to make her almost smile, felt the bottom drop out of something he hadn't admitted he was standing on. "Stop," the queen said, and there was a whip in it now, the crown coming back into her voice. Both of you. You think I did this for genetics? For policy? Child, if it were policy, I would have married you to a human 40 years ago and been done. I did not choose him for what he carries. She rose, slowly, an old woman gathering the weight of a very old grief. I chose a human for you because I once loved one. His name I will not say because I have not said it aloud in 40 years and I am not certain I would survive it. He was an envoy like yours. He was kind, like yours, and he made me laugh in a court that had beaten laughter out of me, and I was going to marry him. She turned back to the window, to the stars, and the conquered found out. A human near the throne with fresh blood and no house to control, do you see? He was the same wrench I have just made of your John, 40 years too early, before I had the crown to protect him. So they arranged an accident. A slab of ceiling, as it happens. They are not an imaginative people. Ariana had gone white. I did not choose John to save our blood, the old queen said, so quietly the stars nearly drowned it. I chose him because I have spent 40 years watching my people die of caution, and I decided that before I followed them into the dark, I would give my daughter the one thing they took from me. A chance. Even a doomed one. Even a dangerous one. She closed her eyes. The genetics are true. Everything I said is true. But it was never why. That daughter was the secret I handed you on the stair, that I had finally chosen, after 40 years, to be brave on your behalf instead of my own. And into the ringing silence that followed, the doors burst open, and Lord Adrian walked in with a dozen armed men and a smile that had finally stopped pretending to be one. How moving, he said. Truly, I wept. Now, shall we discuss the succession properly, the old way? The dozen armed men fanned into the room with the easy confidence of people who have already counted the exits and found them all on their side. Their weapons were the slim silver kind the Vandari favored, humming faintly, the sort of thing that did not leave a mark on the furniture and did leave a very permanent one on a person. John, who got queasy on fast elevators, discovered that a species-level coup does wonders for the nerves. It turned out that when the fear got large enough, it simply wrapped all the way around into a strange, ringing calm. Adrian, the Queen said, without turning from the window, you always did have a flair for entrances and no gift at all for what comes after them. You'll forgive the theater. It's a family failing. He strolled to the table, picked up the melted crest, and turned it over with distaste. You've cost us a great deal of trouble, Majesty. 1,000 years of careful arrangement, and you undo it with 6 words on a staircase. Do you know what the houses will do when the blood dies? They'll tear each other apart over the ashes. We were going to manage it, order it. One house on the throne, holding the rest together while we adapted, quietly, on our terms. His eyes slid to John. Instead, you've handed the future to him. Well, we'll be taking it back. The princess weds a human. Fine. She'll wed a human of our choosing, in a room without windows, and the envoy here will have an accident. A slab of ceiling, I thought. It has tradition. You should really vary the method, John said. People are starting to notice. 2 ceilings in 1 week. It looks lazy. Adrian smiled at him with real pleasure, the way a man smiles at a wine he's about to finish. I'm going to enjoy the quiet after you. And here was the thing that everyone in the room had gotten wrong about John, the Queen included. They had all spent the week measuring him by what he lacked. No house, no fleet, no blood worth a vote. But a man with nothing to lose is also a man with nothing to protect, and John had spent 11 days as a decorative human learning exactly one thing about the Vandari court. It ran on secrets, and it had no idea what to do with sunlight. Ariana, he said very quietly, not taking his eyes off Adrian. The envoy's ring, the one your protocol office made me wear. It's a diplomatic recorder. It broadcasts every word to the human consulate and the full open court channel for my safety, they said. Nobody's turned it off. Nobody remembered I was wearing it because nobody remembers I'm here. He lifted his hand and let the plain silver band catch the starlight. It's been on since the choosing hall. It's on right now. The room went perfectly still. You've been confessing, John told Adrian almost gently, to an open microphone. The extinction, the cover-up, the conquered, the order to murder a foreign envoy on Vandari soil, which, small point, starts a war your dying people cannot survive. All of it. Live. To every house that isn't yours, and to a human consulate that has been desperate for a reason to take you seriously. He let that land. You said it yourself. Your whole plan ran on quiet. On no one knowing the blood was dying. On no one knowing what the houses had done. I've spent my entire visit being the one person nobody thought worth attacking. A crack of a smile. Turns out that's a very good place to hide a microphone. Adrian's face did something complicated and unrecoverable. You're bluffing, am I? Your men heard the Queen explain the whole extinction. They heard you take credit for a murder. Ask yourself how many of the other 100 houses just heard the Concord admit it's been hiding the end of the species so its own people could rule the ruins. John spread his hands. You didn't need to lose the throne to me, Adrian. You just needed everyone to find out at the same time. That's the thing about a secret holding 100 people together. Cut it once, and it doesn't unravel. It detonates. For one held breath, nothing happened. Then, faintly, through the open doors and the stone and the long midnight corridors, came a sound John had never heard from the Vandari, and would never forget. The rising, furious roar of a court that had just, all at once, learned what had been done to it. Doors slamming, voices climbing. The specific building thunder of 100 noble houses discovering they had been the marks in someone else's game. Adrian's dozen men heard it too. And a man will follow orders into a coup he believes is winning. He will not, as a rule, die for one that has just become the most hated name on the planet. John watched it happen in their faces, the arithmetic, the same arithmetic Ariana had done in the archive, and one by one the humming silver weapons dipped and lowered and pointed at nothing. You, Adrian began, and got no further, because the Queen had crossed the room with a speed that gave the lie to every year of her age, and struck him once, open-handed, across the face. 40 years of grief in the arc of it. That, she said, was for a man whose name I will now say aloud, because the whole planet is listening, and it is finally safe to. And she said it, a single soft human name, out into the recording ring, into the roaring court, into 40 years of silence. And John saw something in her come unclenched at last. Then the Queen's guard flooded through the doors, and it was over, quickly and almost anticlimactically, the way real things end when the story that held them up has already collapsed. Adrian went out between two soldiers, no longer smiling, a footnote to his own ambition. And in the wreck of the room, amid foam crust and starlight and the distant thunder of a species waking up, Ariana turned to John. Not the princess, not the solution, just her. You were listening to me, she said. In the archive, on the floor, all of it. Not because of what I am. Ariana, John said, I have never once in my life been interested in your blood. Your arguing, on the other hand. She kissed him before he could finish the joke, which he felt on balance was the correct editorial decision. The truth, once it was out, did to the Vandari what sunlight does to a locked room. It did not fix anything, but it made the fixing possible, which turned out to be the entire difference. In the weeks after, the throne world had the shell-shocked look of a person who has just realized the smoke alarm has been going off for 3 generations. The 100 noble houses, freed at last from a secret that had bound them into a single closed fist, discovered they could open their hands. The extinction clock, spoken aloud, stopped being a horror to hide and became simply a problem. And the Vandari, John was learning, were extraordinary at problems once you let them look directly at one. The human consulate, which had spent 40 years being treated as a courtesy, suddenly found itself the most important embassy in the sector, fielding requests for exchange, for study, for the slow, careful weaving together of two peoples who had turned out to be far less separate than either had believed. It was, everyone agreed, the largest diplomatic undertaking in living memory, and it had been triggered, historians would eventually note with some bewilderment, by an envoy who had defeated an assassination attempt with his elbow and never quite explained how he'd ended up married. Adrian was tried in an open court under an open sky, every word of it broadcast, which John felt showed a certain poetic economy. He was not executed. The Vandari, having just decided to stop killing their own future, found they'd lost the taste for it. He was stripped of house and name and sent to administer a mining station on a moon so dull that John privately considered it the crueler sentence. The Concord itself was dissolved, not by decree, but by simple exposure. A conspiracy is only as strong as the dark it stands in, and there was no dark left anywhere. As for the Queen, she did a thing that astonished the court, and did not, in the end, astonish John at all. She abdicated. She stood before the open channel one last time, an old woman done with pretending to be iron, and she said that she had spent 40 years ruling out of caution and grief, and that a people learning how to hope again deserved a ruler who was not made mostly of the past. Then she named Ariana and stepped down, and became, for the first time since John had met her, simply a mother, which she turned out to be remarkably bad at and visibly delighted to attempt. She took up the study of human poetry. She was terrible at that too. She persisted with the specific joy of a person who has spent a lifetime being excellent at things that cost her everything, and has decided that being cheerfully mediocre at something harmless is its own kind of freedom. When John asked her once if she ever regretted the 6 words on the stair, she looked at him for a long moment with her wet iron eyes and said only, "I said his name aloud, in the end. Everything after that is profit." And she never spoke of the grief again, because she no longer had to carry it in silence, and a grief you are allowed to set down is a grief that finally stops being a wound. John changed too, though he was the last to notice it, as people generally are. The man who had arrived on the throne world 11 days a coward, queasy on elevators, decorative by trade, an expert at standing near walls, was not the same man who had stood in a coup and taken it apart with a silver ring and the truth. He'd found out something the whole glittering court had never learned, because they'd all been too busy being important to discover it, that a man with nothing to lose is not weak. He is simply free. Free to notice the microphone everyone forgot. Free to walk into a hall of 100 jeweled ambitions and be the one person not playing the game. It turned out that the very thing that had made him worthless as a suitor, no house, no fleet, no blood worth a vote, was exactly the thing that had made him able to see clearly, and John, who had spent his whole life apologizing for being unremarkable, quietly retired the apology. They married a second time on a spring evening, under the crystal dome of the same choosing hall, and it could not have been more different from the first. There was no gilding. Ariana wore something plain and dark and was, John thought, unbearable in it, herself, warm-skinned and mortal and grinning, her long ears catching the light when she turned her head to laugh, which she did often now, having decided somewhere along the way that laughter was worth the cost of it. There were no 100 rehearsed suitors. There was a hall full of people, human and Vandari both, and a queen who was now a mother weeping in the front row without shame, and a contrition melon on the refreshment table that apologized to every single guest and was, by unanimous agreement, the emotional high point of the catering. "You know," John said quietly, as they stood together at the base of the great stair where all of this had begun. "The first time you walked down these stairs, I checked behind me to see who you were looking at. There was a wall." "I remember," Ariana said. "It was the least regal thing I have ever witnessed. I nearly changed my mind." "And now?" She considered him. This unremarkable human who had turned out to be the only thing in 100 bloodlines her mother had been right about. "Now," she said, "there is no wall behind you. There is a whole people, learning how to have a future. And you are standing in front of all of it, being ridiculous, exactly on time." She took his hand. "My mother handed me 6 words on a staircase and no explanation, and I spent a very long week furious about it. I understand them now." "Choose a human man," John said. "No," Ariana said, and kissed his knuckles, and smiled the smile she no longer bothered to suppress. Choose. That was the whole gift. She spent 40 years unable to, and she handed me the one thing she never got. The rest was just you happening to be the one I'd have chosen anyway. She drew him up the stair, into the light, into the noise of two peoples who had decided, against every careful instinct, to be brave. Come along, envoy. We have a future to be unremarkable in together. I hear it's going to take generations. Good, John said and went. Somewhere out there, a queen made of iron spent 40 years carrying a name she was too afraid to say, and the tragedy was never that she lost the man she loved. The tragedy was that she let the fear of losing him again decide the next 4 decades of her life. How many of us are doing the same thing right now? Guarding a wound so carefully that we forget the wound was only ever the price of having loved something at all. Ariana was handed 6 words, and no map. Choose a human man. She thought it was a command. It took a coup, a near death, and a species on the edge of the dark for her to understand it was something else entirely. That the gift her mother gave her was not the who, but the choosing. Because her mother had never been allowed to. And John, unremarkable, decorative, apologizing his whole life for taking up space near a wall, never once suspected that the very things he was ashamed of were the things that would let him see clearly in a room full of people too important to notice the truth. He had nothing to lose, and so he was free. So here is what the story leaves in your hands, quietly, the way the queen left those 6 words. What are you guarding so carefully that you've forgotten how to choose? What name have you stopped saying aloud? And the parts of yourself you keep apologizing for? The plainness, the ordinariness, the not enough. What if those were never the flaw? What if they were the microphone no one thought to look for? The Vandari were dying of caution, of playing it safe for 1,000 years. And they were saved, in the end, by the single most dangerous thing a frightened people can do. They chose, even when it wasn't safe, even when they didn't yet understand why. Maybe that's the only bravery any of us are ever actually asked for. The end. We've reached the end of another Sci-Fi Traveler story, friends. Please don't forget to hit the like button below and leave your thoughts about the story in the comments. The next story is coming very soon. Subscribe to our channel, and don't miss the new stories. Goodbye, friends.